Welcome to Open Vision, the space where we explore what is essential in creating a brighter future. My name is Mariama, and I started this podcast series with 3 goals in mind. First, to show that across industries and across the globe, people are leading initiatives that contribute to a brighter future for people and planet. Secondly, to prove to you, the impact maker, that you're not alone. And 3, to find universal strategic tactics and insight. This is the space where we come together to explore and broaden our horizon on what is possible and on what is essential. Hence, I introduced the concept of cathedral thinking, which entails adopting a long-term vision that inspires us to contribute, even though we may never witness the end result. This episode features Michael Ventura, a leader, educator, and practitioner who seamlessly bridges the worlds of strategy, design, and personal development. From advising global giants like Google and the UN to launching Kismet with Chrissy Teigen and John Legend, Michael's journey is a masterclass in versatility. As the author of Applied Empathy, he embodies the principles of connection and understanding in everything he does. Today, we explore how empathy and embodied leadership can create meaningful impact for ourselves, our communities, and our planet. Starting off, Sub Rosa is now in the past, but I think when looking at your work in founding that company and building it to what it became, I think at some point you even had architects, designers, social designers. It was such a versatile team and working with various organizations on different questions, and then having your own private practice and being part of the faculty of Isalan Institute. Like, the true line in your work, from my point of view, is your holistic point of view or approach to everything you do in work. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So I guess early in my career, it felt very schizophrenic because I was doing a lot of different things, or what I saw as a lot of different things. And so I would have this life walking in as the CEO of Sub Rosa, going into meetings with clients. I'd have this life doing alternative medicine and working in private practice. I'd have this life writing and, all of these different things. And they all felt very compartmentalized. I had a difficult time managing my energy and my well-being amidst all of that. And I had this teacher at the time. His name was Gil Barreto. He's since passed, but he was a very wonderful man who helped me a lot at a time when I needed help. And he said, he had this great voice. He had this voice that he would talk like this, and it had such power behind it,
Wow.
And
Yes.
he would say, always, you had to wear a shirt and tie when you went to meet him. And he was a special man. And he said to me one day, I won't keep doing the voice. Imagine the voice. He said, all these little dots that you see in your life, Sub Rosa, practice, all these things. Get in an imaginary helicopter and go up high enough that all of those dots just look like one dot, and ask yourself, what's the one dot? And when I did that exercise, and it took a little while to get into the right mindset for that, I went up and I looked, and to me, the answer was empathy. It was, all of these jobs are the same job. So everything you just described in that introduction sounds like a lot of different things. It's one thing. It's understanding, to the best of my ability, what it's like to be you, and what are the challenges and complexities that you're facing. That's the empathy practice. And then, depending on the modality, whether it's Sub Rosa or alternative medicine or something else, offer a tool or a recommendation or a way to support you in the moment you're in, so that you can get over that hump and get to your next destination. And so once I realized everything I was doing was the same job with different tools, my life got a lot simpler.
And simplicity is also key in getting or feeling really successful in a way, because we can make it super complex and never be present in a moment, but making it simple also makes that being present more easy, I think. Yeah. And so applying empathy into helping people navigate change or coming up with solutions, what are some of the key lessons that you've taken away from doing that work?
Well, broadly speaking, most people want to be interesting and very few people want to be interested. And I think being interested is more interesting, right? I think if
Yeah.
you're actually the best question asker in the room, you're adding a lot more value than the person who thinks they have all the answers. And so to be able to slow down, ask good questions, be curious, be present, you know the difference between anytime you've been talking with somebody and they're giving you their full undivided attention versus you can tell that they're like thinking about something else or they're like distracted. You share more, you give more to the people who are making space for you, right?
Yeah.
So just that act of being present, making eye contact, leaning in, paying attention, that leads to deeper connection. And most people, when someone is talking, all they're thinking about is what they want to say next.
Yeah.
And that's not a real conversation.
No. If we really want to approach the future in a constructive way, why is empathy so important in doing so?
Well, we're more connected as a human race than ever before in history, right?
Mm.
With all of our devices and all of our technology, we are more connected now than ever before. And while that's wonderful, it also shines a light on our differences faster, right? When someone lived on the other side of the world that you never saw, never heard from, never saw any window into their world,
Yeah.
it kind of them never crossed your mind. But now you see them in TikTok or you see them, posting something on Instagram, and you're getting exposure to more cultures, more people, and this particularly in the States and in some parts of Western Europe, this xenophobic mentality that a lot of places are starting to develop is a scary reaction to a more increasingly globalized world. And empathy does I don't pretend that empathy has all the answers, right? Like I think what empathy has is all the questions, right? And so how interesting is it to be able to see into someone else's world? What things do you want to learn? What things seem strange or peculiar to you? What things help validate the choices you've made, but also don't negate the choices they've made, right? And
Mm.
those kinds of things are so important as we see into a bigger picture with more people, with more complexity. And we look at crises that are happening, whether it's in the Middle East right now or in the Amazon, and these things that used to be very far away are right at our front door.
Yeah.
And we have to do the work to pay attention and to understand them more completely.
Hmm. So would you say then that understanding is the first step in building or co-creating a solution, asking
Yeah.
questions?
And understanding doesn't mean agreeing, which I think is very important, right? A lot of people think, oh, if I understand, I have to like co-sign, right? And that's not the case, right? You can understand and still hold your point of view,
Yeah.
but the act of being willing to understand is generous, and that generosity is often a bridge building tool. In the US, we have the red party, the Republicans, and the blue party, the Democrats, right? And so there's this like colloquialism that people talk about, which is a purple strategy, like everyone coming
Okay.
together. Empathy is not a purple strategy,
No.
right? That's not what it's about. It's not about saying we can all get along and hold hands. There will always be disagreements. There will always be different opinions, but it's how capable are you of maintaining the grace and the curiosity to hold their opinion with respect while also being respected for your opinion.
Powerful. There's this rush to judge or formulate a judgment on what other people are doing.
Mhm.
And what I like what you're saying is that it takes grace and generosity. And that makes me think of one of your board positions for the Burning Man project, where people come together for a short amount of time and they live amongst each other based on just a few principles. What is the magic behind? Why does it work? And could we apply that to, on a bigger scale, maybe?
So Burning Man's a very interesting experiment. I had the good fortune to be an advisor for a few years with that organization during a moment of big transition. And what I learned during that time was there's a really delicate balance they've created between wild, open-ended permission and principles. And there are
Mm.
10 principles that Burning Man is governed by. And I won't tell you all 10 because we don't have the time, but like, things like leave no trace, right? What you bring in, you take out. And if you see someone else leaving something, if they haven't picked it up and you haven't convinced them to pick it up, then you pick it
Pick
up,
it
right?
up.
Like, leave no trace in that desert. Decommodification, no logos. Any truck that like moving truck that someone rents to bring their stuff out, one of the first things people do when they park it is they get big pieces of paper and they hang something over the logo. There's no logos.
No logos
There's
nowhere.
no brand, there's no like brand activation. There's no like, oh, I'm going to the Coca-Cola pavilion. That doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
And so what you have are just
Mm.
people. There's a gifting culture. So people think that Burning Man, the misconception a lot of the time is that it's a barter culture because there's no money, right?
Yes.
You can't spend money there unless you want to buy ice. It's the one thing you have to spend money on. But everything else is gifting. But people think from afar that that means I come and I bring something and like, oh, I would like this thing you're offering. I will trade you this. It's not trade. It's just generosity. And so because someone gave you a grilled cheese sandwich at 3 in the afternoon, maybe 4 hours from now, you might end up giving someone a massage or taking someone for a ride on the back of your bicycle to the other side of town because that's where they need to go, right? And it just perpetuates this generosity that it
Mm.
has no expectation of reciprocity. And, you know, it's utopian because we live in a capitalistic world that requires a lot of the things I just said to
Yeah.
sort of take a back seat. But it does create a ripple and it does create a little hangover effect. And when you come back into the real world after it, you do find it's changed you a little. And
Mm.
you are a little more generous and you are a little more curious and playful. I think another thing that we miss in this fast work centric world we all live is
Play.
play. And play's great. And when you give yourself as an adult the space to play again, you see these people out there with like a smile from here to here. And it's not just because they took mushrooms that morning, it's because they actually like are having a great time
Yeah.
remembering what it's like to just not have to, be in the all hands meeting today at 9:30 for an hour and listen to the same people with the same updates.
Play is very important. I immediately have that vision in my mind of I think it was like 10 years ago, where all of a sudden, all of the startups, all of the businesses would have like a ping pong table at the
Yeah.
office because play, stimulates the brain and then you relax. But I think it's more than that, really having that inner smile come out because you're really experiencing the sense of joy and freedom in being yourself. So I also think if we are creating a list here of empathy and generosity and play, what about authenticity?
Mhm.
Being able to fully be yourself. Do you see that also in your private practice where people come to you for expansion of self?
Yes, I'll say two things. In the private practice, so it's an alternative medicine practice. I work in two traditions. I work in a traditional Chinese medicine tradition of Qigong, and then I work in a indigenous practice from the Nawa peoples. And the both of these traditions are about connecting you to your most original, intuitive, authentic version of yourself, right? When you're fully embodied, you're able to show up in the world as a whole person, right?
Mm.
You're not distracted by personalities and ego and all these other things.
What does that mean, like fully embodied?
Well, so think about it this way. I'll explain it from the tradition of the Nawa because I think they do a very beautiful job of talking about this. So when you're inside your mother for the first 9 months, that's your whole world, right? And you're connected to her from your navel, your gut, your first brain, as a lot of science has now proven that this is actually the first brain.
Mm.
It's the first thing that develops the microbiome. All of this sort of stuff is really like where we begin. And through that umbilical cord into your mother, you get oxygen, you get blood, you get nutrition, you get all the things you need in order to thrive. And when you come out of your mother, what's the first thing that happens? Yeah, the cord gets cut, right? And so in the Nawa tradition, that's a death. You died to be born in this mother, where you
Mm.
breathe differently, where you get nutrition in a different way, where you exist in a bigger womb. And that shock when that cord gets cut
Yes.
shifts your center of power because that's all you knew. So you move from your gut to where babies go next, center of power, their heart, right? And what do babies do for the first 2 years? They don't have language. All they do is they just emote, right? They
Yes.
cry, they smile, they do all of their interaction from an emotional heart-centered place. And then as you get older, you get a name and language and personality and ego, and that center of gravity moves up to your
Up.
head,
Yeah.
right? And here's the thing. Have you made mistakes when you're thinking from your brain before? Of course, we all have.
Yes.
Has your heart sometimes, although it is lovable, it's like a golden retriever, but like sometimes it also like, knocks the dishes off the table. Like sometimes the heart makes a mistake,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But when you've made choices from your gut in your life, deep intuitive choices, they've never been wrong.
Never.
And so the work of this practice, and in traditional Chinese medicine, there's called dantians. There's 3 centers of power, and they correspond exactly the same, right? It's Jing, Qi, and Shen, right? And it's the
Yeah.
same 3 places. Um, when we move our primary source back to our intuitive self, our original self,
Mm.
we're embodied because we're not dealing with emotions or personalities driving the bus. We need them. We need them both. It makes a complete experience in this life to have our mind and our heart actively participating in our life. But don't give them the keys to the bus. Let this intuitive self drive the bus, and they can be great passengers.
Mm. Beautiful.
I will add, you
Yeah.
said something earlier that I kind of forgot, to be honest, because it's been a while since I was running Sub Rosa. But one of the special things about that place was that people really did come as their whole self. And I can't tell you the amount of employees I had over the years who would come back afterwards and say, I've worked somewhere else. I've worked somewhere else. I didn't appreciate it then, but I really appreciate it now, how
Mm.
much space that culture gave us to be our funniest, weirdest, most eccentric. It was like a Montessori school
Oh, yeah.
for work. Okay. Like it was like people would joke, it was like, the land of misfit toys. It was like, couldn't fit in anywhere else. And somehow you ended up here. There was a truth inside that for sure, but I think it
Mm.
wasn't like intentional. It was just that we knew when someone would come in an interview and you saw that thing, whatever that thing with that brilliance, that little sparkle, that thing that was like,
Yes.
oh, this person is special and
Mm.
they haven't found their place yet.
Mm.
Let's give them a place here. It was such a great place for that, for giving people a space to learn that their complete and total version of themselves that was valuable.
Mm. I feel like I have like 2 questions in my brain. Because I think this is a great segue to talk about ourself as a cathedral. But maybe before that, you said something interesting. You said first we are in the womb with our mother, and then we are born, which is also a that, and then we're in our new mother or Mother Gaia, the earth. And I thought to myself, in some ways, we kind of have a crazy or disconnected relationship with our mother because we're hurting her in a way. What's going on from your point of view in that sense?
Individual priorities have taken over the control from what's right for the collective. And, a greedy few are willing to hurt and damage a lot in this world, people, environments, all of this sort of stuff, in order to make a little more money. And it's really what, sadly, like money and power are the 2 things that a lot of this come down to.
Mm.
And I've been talking with a friend who does a lot of work in the climate space recently, and he was lamenting how climate change, climate catastrophe, there's been so many like, rebrandings of
Oh,
this
yeah.
because nothing works, right? It's all
No.
like too big and amorphous, and you don't know how to get your arms around it, and you feel helpless, and so you just like, you forget or
Yeah.
you choose to ignore. And I said to him, and I share this here because someone who may listen to this may say, "Oh, that's the thing I'd like to also share." Share it if this resonates with you. I've stopped saying save the planet, and I
Mm.
started saying we need to save ourselves
Yes.
because people are selfish. And when you realize that it's actually not all people, but a lot of people, this isn't about saving the planet. It's literally about saving you. If the Amazon goes away, we lose our CO2 transmutation, right? Like we're not going to have enough oxygen.
Yeah.
If our oceans get more polluted than they already are, we're going to see all kinds of climate crises that we've never seen before. There won't be fish to have in our oceans in 25 years from now if things keep going at this pace. There was a study last week. Every single man in the study, they did like a reproductive organ test.
Yeah.
100% of the men had
Oh, yeah.
microplastic.
I saw that microplastics in them. Yes.
100%. There was not a single person who, like, literally, like, there are babies in utero being born with microplastics already in their body, right? And it's just astounding to me that in spite of all of that, people don't care because it seems like it's not happening to me, it's happening to someone else. It's happening to you,
Mm.
And there was this thing, I saw a meme the other day. Our grandparents' generation were filled with asbestos, and our parents' generation were filled with lead.
Yeah.
And now we are all filled with plastic.
Plastic.
And it's like, we keep problem shifting. We're not getting rid of the problem. The problem is the same problem it's always been, but the material's changing. Science is changing, but the problem's still the problem.
So then if we go back to your mentor and we would jump into the helicopter all the way up and look down, what in essence is that problem that we're dealing with?
Self-interest.
Selfishness, self-interest. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I always see like nature or planet Earth. I saw this image on Instagram by Greenpeace. It said the planet is what we have in common. It's our shared home. And I thought that was very beautiful.
The most enlightened view I've ever sort of persistently encountered on this is when you talk to astronauts or when you read articles from astronauts, because there's something that happens which is documented as the overview effect, which is when you finally get outside of this place and you see the endless expanse of the dark universe, and then you look back at this little blue dot and you realize how fucking special this is.
Yes.
And how lucky we are to be here experiencing this. And yet we're doing it all wrong. And so when you talk to astronauts, they have this really deep existential sadness, but also hope in a way. Like it's a complex emotion.
That's very lonely because no one understands.
Yeah, because how many people have seen the Earth from above? Very few, right?
Yes.
And so but they were like, so many of them have said, like, if only everyone could see that and like actually experience it, like wars would stop, pollution would end. Like it's just, we get so wrapped up in what's 5 feet in front of our faces that we forget there's so much bigger things at play. A few years ago, there was this big trend in social media that I refer to as hustle porn. And it was everyone talking about, like, I work 18 hours a day and I've done, I never
work is the only way. Yeah.
That was the vibe from so many like business pundits. And I was just like, what are we being champions of? What are we trying to convince people this is a good idea? That like I only see my kids on weekends because I work all day every day. It's like, people, we gotta shift our priorities, and that's not heroic. That's not getting us where we want to go.
Could you maybe share with the listeners your own story?
Yeah, so I started my first business, which grew into becoming Sub Rosa, when I was 24, and we didn't have investors, we didn't have mentors around us. We were just my buddy and I from college started this what was then a digital agency. And it grew into something else. And we didn't know what the hell we were doing. Typical growth of a startup story. I had a lot of stress because I worried about everything. I mean, I worried about our team. I worried about where the next check was going to come from. I worried about who the next client's going to be. And are our current clients getting what they need? And if I screw up next month, these 5 people are not going to be able to pay their rent because we're not going to be able to pay them, right? So I felt this like great sense of responsibility, maybe more than I should have, but whatever. It was what it was for me. And so I would work really hard. And then as soon as the day was over, I would fall into very poor coping mechanisms. I would go get drunk, or I would like, stay out all night, or, do whatever it was to kind of like just forget the day.
Mm.
And I would wake up, slap some water on my face, go back in, do it again. And I was just burning that candle at both ends really, really hot. And that was very unsustainable. And one day I was changing the water cooler, and I just remember like a flash of like white went in front of my eyes, and I opened my eyes and I was laying on the ground. The water cooler's like leaking on me. It's like so cinematic in my memory now, right? But it was very real then. And I couldn't get up. And I found out that I had herniated 3 discs in my back. And so eventually I get over to the hospital and get an MRI and all that stuff. And they say, look, you have bone on bone. We're going to need to do spinal surgery. You're going to have arthritic pain for the rest of your life. But like, this is the only option you have. Like, this is bad. We need to fix this. And I left the hospital that day without the surgery with a walker, and went home and took a bunch of pain pills and fell asleep. And then the next day I was talking to a friend, and he said, have you ever tried acupuncture? Eastern medicine wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. I said, no, I've heard of it, but I've never tried it. He goes, you should, I mean, like, what's the worst that could happen? You'll go get the surgery. He's like, but like, try something else before that. So I went, found an acupuncturist. After like the third or fourth visit, he said, I don't think you have a back problem. I think you have a stress problem. And I think if you change the way you live your life and change the way you manage stress, your back will heal itself. He said, have you ever tried meditation? And I said, I've tried, but like, I can't sit still, and my brain goes a million miles a minute. And he was like, well, you should try Tai Chi. It's moving meditation. It will give you something else to do. I started going to Tai Chi, started practicing Qigong, continued going to acupuncture. 6 months later, no surgery, back was totally healed. And that opened up the whole spiritual buffet line, right? And I went on every ceremony, every modality. Like, I tried them all. I was like, this is the coolest stuff ever.
Yeah.
And some of it was really interesting. Some of it was not for me. Some of it was very much for me. The metaphor of the buffet holds up nice in this case. It's sort of like, you wouldn't want to eat a mixed plate of 15 different cultures' foods every day for the rest of your life. Like, you're going to be sick, or like, you're going to have some problem, right? And the same is true with this. You could walk that buffet line all the time, but you're never going to really get the benefit because you're never going deep with a practice, right? And so then I picked what worked for me, which was this Taoist practice of Qigong and Tai Chi. And then along the way, also met my indigenous teacher. And then those became the two things I decided to say, I'm going to go deep and really stay with these. These work for me.
What is essential for a leader to, number one, save themselves, and then also, hopefully, in the spirit of cathedral thinking, contribute to the well-being of the collective?
The best leaders I know how to shift between leading from the front, leading from the middle, and leading from the back. The worst leaders only do one. What do I mean by that? Sometimes the front is, I need to inspire. I need to provide a confidence boost to this team. I need to let them know they're doing a good job. I need to model a behavior that is going to cascade into the culture. Leading from the middle is, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and do this with you. I'm going to get my hands dirty. We're going to figure this out. Leading from the back is, you're good at this. You make the call. Those are 3 different styles of leading. The best leaders know how to do all 3.
How would that translate into self-leadership?
Sometimes you do need to be inspiring to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to give yourself a pep talk. From the middle, sometimes it's acknowledging that like there's work to do. And then from the back, kind of going back to the intuitive self versus the emotional or the intellectual self, trusting that like, yeah, this is going to have a bunch of ideas up in your head, but actually like, you can't force everything. And so many times we try to accelerate the pace of the natural occurrence of something. And I have a big tendency for that. I get impatient when I know what the right thing to do is, and I try to get it done. And I remind myself that it's going to happen. It just happens at the pace it's meant to happen at, not the pace I want it to happen at.
Let's go back to the cathedral that we're all building and we're all contributing to. Would you say that if you would follow your purpose from your gut, do you think we are complementary to each other if we really follow that inner purpose.
Absolutely. There are pieces of your puzzle that someone else has.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's a human being alive who feels like they lived an accomplished life that would say they did it all on their own. It goes back to curiosity and empathy, right? Like, are you willing to go meet those people? Are you willing to ask for help? Are you willing to admit you don't have every answer? All of those things are what open the space for new puzzle pieces to fall into place.
Yeah.
But when you sit with your blinders on and think you have all the right answers, you're going to be missing a big corner of that puzzle for a long time.
So blinders on is actually either delaying your progress or your fulfillment or your purpose, or you can miss it even. You can just miss out on it.
Right?
Yeah. Do you think that's instilled in us as humans to contribute or be of service?
It used to be, and it still is in certain cultures. I do a lot of work with indigenous communities. Many of the Native American communities talk about 7-generation thinking, right? Like any choice you make today should be mindful of 7 generations forward. How will this impact them? If I plant this tree today, will it be giving fruit to my grandchildren's grandchildren in 7 years? Right?
Yeah.
Did I make the right choice? When you live your life on quarter to quarter earnings and profitability and reaching your Series B, like these mile markers that are very short time horizon, it doesn't give people a lot of space to think spaciously about that. There was a organization, I think they still exist, called the Long Now Foundation. And it was all about 100-year thinking. How do we look out into the horizon and actually really understand the choices and the way the world is going, and how are we planning for that? Stuart Brand was the creator of that. That's the sort of thinking that I think is rarefied these days, but shouldn't be. It should, I wish more organizations were thinking this way. There's a nonprofit I'm involved in called Tribal Link. One of the things that we've been advocating for, and some organizations have embraced it already, is building indigenous informed perspective into their governance. So how do you make sure that the choices you're making are right for the planet, right for the communities that produce the natural resources that go into your products, all of these sorts of things. And often it helps to have an indigenous perspective at the table, because it brings a face to the idea. And you see that person and you're like, oh, wow, that we haven't considered that. And we really should be considering that. But when it's like the 17th bullet point in a PowerPoint that you're getting presented to, no one pays attention to it. But when that person's there and they say the right things and they make the point, change happens.
What would you like to leave our listeners with in moving forward, building a better future for themselves and also for others?
You can be gracious. You can be kind. You can be curious. You can be interested. And those things make your life more rich.
And they're free.
And they're free. None of those things cost money.
Thank you, Michael. When we had the conversation prior to this recording, Michael talked about the significance of viewing yourself as a cathedral. And I think that his insights on empathy, embodiment, and leading with intention remind us of the power we each hold to build bridges. Bridges between ourselves, others, and the world around us. Whether it's rethinking leadership, embracing 7-generation thinking, or saving ourselves to save the planet, trusting the intuitive self.